Hello. This video is about the annotated bibliography draft. Specifically the draft, of course, it will be related to the final draft as well. But since we're in week 11, let's focus on the draft. And so here we have week 11, and you see all the things that we are doing in this week. The main assignment is the annotated bibliography draft. You even have a quiz on the directions. So you'll need to read those directions closely and answer some questions on them. So I'm going to click here into draft, view instructions. Now, here we have, as it says here, it's a preliminary version, meaning it's an early version of your final annotated bibliography. And what I've done in the directly in Blackboard here is provided some instructions for the draft specifically. And you can see those, but I think to get the most out of this, you will need to click into the final paper, the final assignment directions for the annotated bibliography. This gives you an overview, and it mentions that you will need 2 sources for the draft. The final draft is a minimum of 4 sources. So what you should do, you should click into the final draft assignment. So this is the write-up for the final draft, but you're following the same format. The only difference is that you don't need as many sources, so that you will have a chance to practice writing about the sources without needing to do all of them right up front. And then my goal is to provide feedback before the final draft is due. That is really only for those who submitted on time. If this gets submitted late, there won't be enough turnaround time for feedback from me, unfortunately. So you're going to go through this process. Basically, what an annotated bibliography is a list of potential sources that you will use or may use in your final draft, or in your final essay, the final draft of that essay as well, of course. And so this is itself focusing on, or it functions as a preliminary task. It's really important because the final paper is source-based, so you really need to understand your sources, and this, in some ways, forces you to really interact with those sources and to think about narrowing your topic before you sit down to actually write the essay. And so you can kind of see the instructions, and you may also need to be looking at the final paper directions, because that will give you an idea of where you're going after the annotated bibliography. So I'm going to scroll through here. You can see these requirements. You can see the source list. So it's formatting, guidelines for AI use. I think what might be helpful to many of you, if you're lost about like what is this thing, the annotated bibliography, I would click on and go directly to the sample annotated bibliography. What this does, it's obviously on a different topic, but it shows you what it should look like. So it would have your MLA heading, fine. It should include working title of your essay. So you're thinking ahead to your essay and thinking, okay, what is my essay going to be about? Your title should indicate that. You, of course, can revise this later. A discussion of the broad subject of what you're going to be addressing in your paper, and then a working thesis statement. So a statement of what you think you're going to be arguing in your essay. And this will help you evaluate your sources. You should be essentially evaluating your sources in light of your thesis or your focus. And this maybe will make more sense as I go down. Now, the main part of the annotated bibliography is that you have your sources. So for the final draft, you would have 4 of these. And I hate to scroll so much, but I'm going to scroll down so you can see it. So 1, 2, 3, this one has 4. So you see 4 different sources. Now, let's go back up to this one with the highlights. Each source has what's called a full citation, and we're using MLA style. There's some resources for how to do that, but you get the basic idea. Last name, first name, article title, where it was published, called the container in MLA, date of publication, things like that. So you include this information. It's important for us to know where the information comes from, and it's useful for you, so it's easy to get back to. So it's really important that you do this clearly and accurately. Now, after the citation, you have what's called the annotation. That's all of this. And the annotation has 3 parts. So those 3 parts are 1, the summary, which is highlighted in yellow. 2, some sort of evaluation of the source, why it's credible, who the authors are, that type of thing. And then 3, discussion of how it's relevant to your particular focus, your essay. This one seems to be heavy on the summary and a little bit light on the evaluation and the connection to the project, but it does all 3 and it does it sufficient. So you'll be looking at those things. And so that's what you're going to end up doing. I'm going to go back here. And then there's some more resources you can go through that I've found that are helpful to students. Helpful to students getting the basics of it. And I'm going to mention this right now. And I'm sorry, kind of going a little bit out of order here, but I want to hit upon sort of the key ideas that I think will be most important to you, or at least most important to you in terms of my explaining it a little bit more. And one is the source finding. So for the annotated bibliography and for your essay itself, you're going to choose 2 from the list that's provided. You might have already done that in your proposal from last week. So you could use those 2. But you're also going to have the option to find additional sources. Again, not a requirement that you find additional sources, but you have that option. You could use all 4 sources from ones that we've used in the class, or you could use 2 from ones we used in the class, 2 from somewhere else that you find. And so that's going to be up to you. For the annotated bibliography, you should have 4 sources. For the essay, you should have a minimum of 4 sources. Now, something that's really, really important, source find. You may use generative AI to suggest potential sources, but you must independently verify that they're real and that they're credible. So I can tell you that over the last year, I've had to give students failing grades for work for annotated bibliographies because they've submitted annotated bibliographies with sources that weren't real. Because essentially if you ask an artificial intelligence like ChatGPT to create an annotated bibliography for a particular topic, it may use some real sources, but by the way that the Gen AI works is it wants to find something perfect for you. And so if it doesn't exist or doesn't have access to it, it will fabricate, it will make it up, and it will sound like a real source. And it will write you an annotation for it. But it's actually fairly easy to check whether these sources are legitimate. And so if you do that, that's a big problem. That's a plagiarism and academic integrity issue for obvious reasons, because you haven't, if you submit annotations for a source that doesn't exist, you're saying that you wrote an annotation on something that you couldn't possibly have read because it doesn't exist. So that is obviously an integrity problem. So keep that in mind. Don't make that mistake. Check all your sources. And you should, as I've noted before, you really must do your own work on the annotations in terms of summarizing them, talking about the credibility, and also talking about how it's relevant to your topic. This is the only way you're going to learn and be able to internalize what the sources are about, so that it will help you with the final paper. And that's what we're all about, is learning these things. Now, that's not to say that if you have a really difficult source that you're looking at and you want help understanding it, you can give that to a generative AI piece. There's so many of them, and ask it questions, help use it to help clarify information. You can do that. You just need to be careful that in the end result is something that you've put together and that you stand. And then, of course, if we're going back to the point that I said before, if the sources aren't real, it's obvious that you so just be very careful. So those are just some thoughts on this annotated bibliography. Key pieces to remember is what you're doing is you're providing another overview of what you intend to focus on your essay at the top. Then you're providing sources that you may use in that, and you're explaining those sources, telling us what the source is about. You're telling us or discussing the reliability, the credibility of that source. And you're explaining how it relates to your focus. All of this then will transition into the work that you're doing to prepare to write your draft of your essay, of your argument. So keep that in mind, and keep in mind that for the draft, you only need 2 sources. For the final draft, you need 4. You can turn in 4 for the draft as well, but only require 2. Just remember that you have additional sources for the final draft, and that you review my feedback on the submitted draft before you submit the final draft. Again, provided that the draft is submitted on time, so there's enough time for me to review it before the final. So hopefully that's helpful. There's a lot of resources. And feel free to reach out to me or to our embedded tutor for help with this sometimes confusing, but very important academic task.